on Android with DelphiFMX, the cross-platform GUI framework. This is part 2 on Android with DelphiFMX, the cross-platform GUI framework. This is part 2 of our Python GUI development webinar series. In part 1, we looked at using Python for Delphi, Delphi VCL for Python to build Windows applications, and a brief introduction of the FireMonkey framework. And this one, we're diving into FireMonkey specifically around Android. I put the link you see down at the bottom, blogs.embarcadero.com/?P=130176 in the chat window if you're joining us live. After the webinar, I will have the slides available, although they're also available as a handout. All right, thank you everybody for letting me know about the audio issues. I will start over. So this is the Python on Android with DelphiFMX, the cross-platform GUI framework. This is part 2. Part 1, we talked about Delphi VCL. Agenda, we're going to do introduction to DelphiFMX for Python, look at architecture and platforms, installing and using DelphiFMX for Python, and then finally some demonstrations. I'll actually have a lot of, I think, really cool demonstrations showing Python on Android, and then talk a little about going beyond. Real quick, if you don't remember who I am, there's about me, but I'm going to skip that for now. But I do have some polls. Now, there are, I believe, a lot more people on this week than were on last week, so I do want to run the polls again. First poll is, what best describes you? Are you a Python developer who wants a nice graphical user interface? Are you a Python developer curious about Delphi? Maybe you are a Delphi developer curious about Python, or a Delphi developer curious about what's new, or maybe some other developer altogether. This webinar was built targeting for Python developers who want to have a nice GUI, that are curious about Delphi and wanting to learn more, but I am aware that there'll be all sorts of people on here, so I am presenting this with trying not to assume too much familiarity with one or the other. So there's a question here while the poll's running. Is it possible to use PyScripter with Python installed from Windows Store, or just with Python from python.org? You should be able to use it from the Python from Windows Store just fine. I think the only difference is where it's installed, and it's very flexible in what it's able to work with. It works with all sorts of virtual environments and stuff like that. A question about who the statue is. It's supposed to be Justice. Justice is blind, so I'm not here for justice. I'm here for trying to create content that is appropriate for everybody. So it looks like the majority of people here are Delphi developers curious about Python, as well as some other developers and Delphi developers just curious about what's new. So a good mix. We do have some Python developers who want a nice GUI, which is great. You're here in the right spot, but the rest of you, I hope and I believe, will find some really cool stuff here as well. So let's find out real quick what everybody's Python experience is like. Are you new to Python? Maybe you've used it a while ago, or you're a current Python developer, or maybe you're an expert. And if you're an expert, I have questions for you. Actually, even for experts, we do have a lot of, I think this is a new framework, a new library that you will find really fantastic. Question here is, will it work on Apple Macs with Conda? It will work on Apple Macs, but not with Conda currently. We're working on that. Works on Apple Mac, but not with Conda. Or Conda yet. I believe Conda is coming, but it doesn't currently work with Conda yet on Apple Mac. It does work on other platforms with Conda just fine. Oh, I gotta show the results. There's a few experts on here, which is great. You're going to find some, I think, learn some new stuff about what you can do with this new library. But then most of you have used Python a while ago. And then let's see what everybody's Delphi experience is. Are you maybe used Delphi a while ago, so not a current Delphi developer, or maybe you are a current Delphi developer, or perhaps you are an expert with Delphi, or maybe you have no Delphi experience at all. Again, content's designed hopefully so that it fits everybody, but knowing where everybody's at definitely helps me tailor this session and also improve what the future sessions will be. MicroPython, yeah, MicroPython's cool. That doesn't work with MicroPython yet. Okay, so I'll share the response. It looks like most of you are current Delphi developers, but a few of you are new to Delphi. If you are new to Delphi, if you did not catch the last webinar, part 1, which I will have a link to at the end, goes into more detail about kind of fundamentals of Delphi, but you do not need Delphi experience at all, or even to have Delphi for the majority of what I'm showing. And that's really the goal, is this is a Python library that does not require Delphi, but if you have Delphi, you can certainly use that to extend and do more with it. Let's see. I have a couple more questions here just to better understand kind of the development, what we want to do with MicroPython. Actually, I'll get to these later. So just because I'm talking about two programming languages, it never fails that somebody's like, oh, well, why would you want to use Delphi if I've got Python, or why would you want to use Python if I've got Delphi? And it's not a competition, doesn't require that one is better than the other. It's a matter of finding the right tool for the right job. And I'm a big believer that any serious senior developer is going to have multiple tools in their tool belt, and you are the most productive when you combine those and use the best for each task. Again, if you're not familiar with Delphi for Python, there's a little bit of repeat from last time, and the slides are available from last week's or from the previous session on the website on the blog post. So go there. I will link that from this one as well, but it's not currently there. It doesn't link to it yet, but it will be. So Delphi for Python is a set of free Python modules that brings Delphi's GUI libraries to Python developers. Again, does not require Delphi to use. It does bring a mature, feature-rich, native, and cross-platform GUI framework to Python development. It's based on the open source Python for Delphi Bridge, which is the same technology that powers PyScripter IDE. It is available today on GitHub and PyPy. We say it's currently in beta, but we've been testing it, working with it for a while. I think it's in pretty good shape, but the reality is once the real world gets a hold of it, then we get a lot of feedback. That being said, it's ready to use. There's no limitations on it. It is go out there, grab it, start using it, and file some feedback. So I wanted to kind of show the architecture, the technology stack here. And so I have a line down the middle. Everything on the right is part of Delphi. That requires Delphi. It is works for Delphi. What's on the left is Python related stuff. Now, everything on the left is open source, as in free to use, free to modify, and free to distribute. On the right, though, it's available both via free and commercial licenses, but does come with source, and you're free to have a number of freedoms with the source. It's just not a traditional open source license, not a without getting into the nuances of open source. So specifically what I talk about is the fact that the FireMonkey libraries and Delphi VCL libraries are not open source. They include source, but they're not open source. But they, thanks to the Delphi for Python bridge, are included. So we have these projects over here, Delphi for Python, or Delphi VCL for Python, Delphi FMX for Python, that are open source projects available on GitHub. They, the module, the Python module that is created by compiling that with compiling those includes FireMonkey and VCL. So that module itself is not open source. It's very similar to like the NVIDIA drivers for Linux, for example. If you get the NVIDIA drivers for Linux, then they are not full open source, but they're free to distribute, free to use however you want to. But NVIDIA is not giving away all the source code to all of the technology that they've developed to build their drivers. So free to use, free to however, you can modify these or whatever, but when you build them with Delphi or use the pre-built ones, the FireMonkey and VCL are not open source. They're available under a freeware license, which is available on the GitHub repository. FireMonkey is the cross-platform framework. It takes advantage of GPU libraries to provide hardware-accelerated rich interfaces that is fast and looks great across multiple platforms. FireMonkey supports Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, and Linux. Supports both ARM and x86 Mac OS, 64-bit and 32-bit versions of Windows, Android, and 64-bit Linux. Specifically though, while FireMonkey supports iOS, unfortunately, Apple, at least not that we've been able to figure out from the license agreement, does not allow applications that change their behavior that have source code that executes locally. They do allow it if you go through WebKit with JavaScript, but not anything else. So we're not available for iOS, but with the Python support, but FireMonkey itself does support iOS. One note is similar to VCL. So we talked about VCL last time, but it is not a copy of VCL. So there are some subtle differences. But generally speaking, if you're familiar with VCL, you can come up to speed really quick with FireMonkey. It does use the GPU for effects and animations and the styling system. So it has hardware acceleration on all platforms. And while it is a cross-platform framework, it includes these platform services that kind of simplify the moving between different platforms in that you don't need to understand some of the nuances of each platform. The FireMonkey framework will just look good and work good on all platforms. And with that, let's get started with Delphi FireMonkey for Python. So in part one, we talked about Delphi VCL for Python. Today, we're talking about Delphi FireMonkey for Python. Some of the differences there. Installation, it's available via pip. You just type pip install DelphiFMX. It supports all the platforms you see listed there, and it works on Conda pretty much everywhere but Mac OS. And I would say on Linux, you want to use Conda. Both Linux and Mac OS are kind of complicated in the way the pathing works, at least based on my experience, and then based on what I've seen looking around, is really you want to use Conda or some sort of virtual environment on Linux and Mac OS. For example, on Mac OS, it comes with an early version of Python installed that you could technically replace, but then you might introduce other behaviors, the side effects and stuff like that. So yeah, it works good on Linux with Conda, and you can use Conda on Windows, but definitely you want to use it on Linux. So the details and the download page are available down there at the bottom. You can go to GitHub, Embarcadero.com, DelphiFMX for Python, or PyPy's website. But it just comes down to pip install DelphiFMX. So let's run. I have a few demos here for you, and then I will dissect the demos. I am made the videos pre-recorded because demo gremlins and everything, but here we go. I will start this video. I have a few demos here with DelphiFMX. So for starters, I'm going to go in here and I have Python 3.9. Yep. So let's install DelphiFMX version 0.35. So I don't know why I keep getting these in here. I should clean, something's got to get cleaned up. Anyway, installed 0.1.35, and now I can run Python, import, or say from, I'll do the, so we see we just have the default ones, and now I'll say import, I have to run from DelphiFMX import. And so now we see there's everything we got imported with DelphiFMX. Now the simplest application, this one here, will just application dot. You're not going to probably create this from the REPL here, but just to show that you can, application dot title equals hello DelphiFMX, and application dot main form equals form application. So this is creating a new FireMonkey form and setting application as the owner. So the application object is the main instance of an application. And then I'm going to say application. See, main form. Computers are very picky about spelling. Set props. And so I'm going to set the properties on it here. We'll just say caption. Oops. Caption equals hello world. And we'll make a new message label. Label application dot main form. So we're making the label being owned by application main form, and then we'll say message set props, and we want to say the parent. So the parent is what holds it, whereas the owner, which is what we did on the line before, is who's in charge of it. So in this case, they're the same, but the parent could be, for example, a panel or a layout or something like that that holds it, or you could even embed it inside a button or an edit box or whatever. And then text will say, hello Python from DelphiFMX, and this equals F20 is 100. Uh-oh. See, I was talking and I said parents, plural. There we go. And application dot main form dot show. And now I have to give it the application dot run in order for it to start processing messages and stuff like that. There we go. That's it. I've created a form here from the REPL just because you could. And then I'll say application dot main form dot or close, I guess, if I want to. And that's it. I'm done. Simple application. Now, I was typing the code in here. From here, I can just run this, and there it is there. Or, right, we see there is simplest, so I just say Python simple, and there it is there. This is, I want to just make the simplest possible so you can see the code. I think it makes it easy to grasp. Realistically, this is more what you're going to create an application like. This is using an object-oriented approach here. So here we're in their main, we're creating or initializing the application, creating the form. The form here is a class that we're defining an object, a type we're defining in Python that is a FireMonkey form. Okay. So here we then set up the initialization, what's in the form. We have some event handlers. When the form is shown, this is the event handler that sets the size of the form. And we have a button on the form here with an event handler as well. So I can run this one here. Bring it over here. And when I click me, it changes the label to say thanks. Very simple, again, just to show you the pieces. So this one's actually getting a little more interesting. This is a simple to-do list application, and I can run this, and I've already got a few things on my to-do list. The demo, and I can take things out of here. So let's see, I will take over the world and install DelphiFMX. Those things are done already, and close it. There we go. And if I run it again, it is persisting it to a file, which really, I mean, this is not very complicated, but again, it's just showing you how you do this with DelphiFMX. And the next one I'm going to show is here. This is the desktop controls. So we'll open this up with PyScripter, although you can use UltraEdit or whatever you wanted to use, any notepad, right? Whatever you want to do. There's not necessarily required to use PyScripter. It's just PyScripter's awesome and PyScripter's free. So why not use PyScripter, right? So this one, oops, I didn't mean to do that. This one has more controls on it, and also we'll use styles. So we'll run this guy here. Here it is, and I need to fix it so that it doesn't resize that form so big, which is an easy fix. You saw the last one I did. So here we can see I can scale the stuff. Kind of interesting. But we're going to load a style. So we'll say load style. And I'm going to go with that one, although there's a lot of styles. We don't currently have a bundle of styles that you can get for Python development yet, but we're working on that. We're going to make a free bundle of styles that I'll show you my favorite style right here. Well, my current favorite style. I have a few styles I love, but there you go. Anyway, so we're working on making a bundle of FireMonkey and VCL styles that you can use in Python development that's free, that doesn't require you to have a Delphi installation. Right now I'm using the styles that come with Delphi, but you can make your own styles. There's places online you can buy styles. You could have somebody customize your style or make you a custom style. So lots of options there. So anyway, there's some more controls and showing styles. Now, all these samples I've shown you are available on the repository there. We'll be adding more samples in the near future, but you can just go here to DelphiFMX for Python into the samples folder, and you can see those samples there. Okay, and we're back. I answered a few questions during the demo there, but let's go ahead and break down the example code. So this is the simplest example using a non-object-oriented approach here. We just have to initialize the application object, set the title of the application. Here we're creating the form, the FireMonkey form to be displayed to the user, and setting the properties, which in this case, we're just setting the caption of that form, but you could set other properties here as well. Now we're creating a label that we're going to call message. We set the properties of that label, including the title, the text, the position, and the width of that. I do want to note that the label has an owner, which is what we set here, which is the object that's responsible for it. Usually the form that all the controls are on is responsible for all the controls within the form, whereas the parent is what holds it and displays it. The parent doesn't necessarily have to be the owner, but it can. In this case, it is the owner. But if, for example, the label was on a sub layout or embedded in an edit box or whatever, then the parent would be that. And that just means that the positioning is relative to its parent. And finally, we show the form and run the main loop. And when we're done, we can close it or destroy it and clean everything up. This is the more object-oriented approach here. we're creating a class in Python that is a FireMonkey form. In the initialization, which is similar to the constructor in Delphi, we create the components and some of the properties of components in the show event handler for the form, which we assign. So right here, we assign the show event handler, which happens when the form is shown. And in here, we set the property for the dimensions of the form. And we also set up a button with a click event handler and handle that here. This is in our main block here where we initialize it and create the forms. And our to-do application, just building on the basics from before, and there's not a whole lot complicated here. It's just the basics idea, but I want to show something a little bit more interesting and more involved. And lastly, I wanted to show the method for loading styles, which I will show an alternative here later on. But if you wanted to load styles dynamically, then all you have to do is say this code right here and point it to the style file. And as I mentioned, we are working on a bundle of free styles for Python developers. Right now, I'm using the styles that ship with Delphi. So far, everything I've shown, nothing requires Delphi except the styles because they're not shipped otherwise. But if you have your own styles, then you wouldn't need Delphi at all. So nothing I've shown so far requires Delphi. This is all pure Python, completely free. Just download the libraries from GitHub or from PyPy. Make sure there's no questions. If there is a question here, okay, once a Delphi form is created, is the speed similar to what we'd expect to see in a Delphi executable? Yes. So what if you're the DelphiFMX Python module is a Delphi DLL or shared object. All right, so that is completely pure compiled code in there. Now, if you have a button, an event handler on your form that calls into some Python code that does something slowly in there, then that would be slow. But the form itself, the way the form renders and everything that is innate to the controls is pure compiled code. So it's going to be pure compiled code running natively on Windows, running natively on Mac OS, running natively on Android. There is nothing interpreted in and of the way the form works. Now, if the architecture of Python is such that most of or many of the Python modules, the libraries that Python uses, are written in C, C++, or some other compiled language, even like Delphi. And so if the code behind your button click event just calls out to a Python module, that Python module would also be native. And so you're, in those cases, could have a very performant application. But where you could introduce performance issues is if you have a lot of inefficient code. You can always write inefficient code in whatever language, but the point is that you can have a very efficient, very performant application if you write it intelligently. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you could do to kind of take this a little bit further. Wouldn't it be great if you could take full advantage of Delphi's IDE designers and property editors, WYSIWYG preview with styles, and then export that to Python and then write all your Python code? Turns out we have an expert for that. You can go to GitHub, Embarcadero, DelphiFMX for Python, and you want to find the experts folder in there. For this, you need Delphi. All right, for previously what I showed you, you do not need Delphi, but for this, you would need Delphi installed. It works with any edition of Delphi. You can use the community edition. If you qualify for that, you can use professional, enterprise, or architect, and it should work with a few different versions of Delphi. I'm not sure exactly how far back, probably at least 10 Seattle and newer. But just install the expert and then right click on the form and you can export it. And I do have an example of this here, a demo video. that I think I don't know, I'm really excited about this. I think we have a lot of really cool technology here, and it's great that it's all available for Python.
Just like we had in VCL, we can also export a FireMonkey form. So this is our mobile controls sample here. And I've actually modified the sample that we ship, and I'm adding a style book to it so that we can embed a style right into the application. So all I have to do here is go export to Python. Now, a note, if you right-click on I'm right-clicking on the tab control here. I have to right-click on the form itself, and I'll put it in my samples folder here. Mobile controls with style. And go into actually I can open this with PyScripter. And it created an instance for each of the controls on there. There's a lot of controls here. And then this is where it is reading in the properties from the Python PYD file, which right now this is a binary file, but we are working on making it support text files or text formatted files if you want to go and modify those. It is encoding the style, and you can actually embed graphics in here as well. It encodes all of that into the file, so it creates a single resource that you can use. No code is generated as far as like functionality code, but just the code to create it. And now I can just launch this here, and there we go. Here is my form. This is a Python application now. That has been exported. Just showing you all the controls here. There's nothing very interesting here, but it's cool that it can exports it right from the designer and embeds the styles for you. You come in here, designer thing, just like you want it in Delphi, works in any version of Delphi, and then export it out. Now I have a more interesting, a slightly different sample here I also made up. Go ahead and save that one out here. So this is my favorite, or one of my favorite styles, FireMonkey styles. It's called transparent. And I've come in here and also put the animation components on here. So these components have animations. So I can run this. So there's no code, no Delphi code here. I can run this here in Windows, and you can see there's an animation that kicks in when you check one of these guys here. Why? Just because I could. You could make it do something interesting, I suppose, but I just wanted to do something ostentatious, obvious, crazy. I also added a pop-up menu here. So we'll right-click. Now on this one, I'm right-clicking on the form here. So if I click here, I can't export it. If I click here, export to Python, and form 6, and we'll call it Crazy Town. And we'll jump out here to samples. Now open this up with PyScripter, or I could run it straight from there, I guess, as well. Here we see, here's the title of the application. Now there was an option here we added so that it can, do you want to generate the app initialization? If you don't choose that option, then this is all gone. So if you say no, then that would be let you have multiple forms that make up your Python application, and then you'd have one main block in there. Or if you're loading it into the Android. So here, again, there's all the components, and here's where it streams in the properties for it, and we'll run this. And again, see, look at that. Animations are built in. You didn't have to write any code for that there. And here's a pop-up menu as well. So cool. And that's now application that'll work across all platforms as well.
All right, and there was the demo. So again, just go out here. You need Delphi installed. Go out to Python for Delphi, into the exports folder, install that expert, and you can use that from Delphi to create your Python GUIs. You just, again, showing the examples side by side. We see here it is designed in the Delphi IDE, and we can export it and then run it from Python. I guess I should have flipped that switch, but all the styles are embedded in there automatically. It's currently, the form is binary formatted. Some people were asking about text format so they could edit it. In theory, we should be able to add that feature, but it's just not been added yet. It's something we started looking at, but it's not done yet. And here we see, here's the form running on Windows, which looks really crazy with all those spinning checkboxes, but I thought it would be a very visible behavior. And here we see it running on Python. So identical for all intents and purposes. So there is the question about code behind events, and actually that's a good time to address that. If you are a Delphi developer, you can turn your form, including all your Delphi code that's in there, into a Python module and run it and include it that way. But if you're a Python developer, then there's nothing that translates that Delphi code into Python. All it's doing is embedding the form design. So you export the form for use in Python, then write all the code behind the event handlers in Python. Can you load the Python back into the IDE to change the GUI? No, but if you save the GUI, you could export it again. So there's not really any way you would change the GUI once it's exported. So just save that form design, and you could export it and then make a change, export it again, export it, export it, export it. There's a number of ways, if you want to get creative, and I talk a little about this later, there's a number of ways you can get more creative with this, but all the code that we have is on there, so you can do whatever you want to. You could get really creative. So, all right, the main course, the deploying to Python to Android. Yes, Python on Android. I think this is really cool. It's one of those things. It's like when we first started talking about this, it's like technically we should be able to get there. Let's figure it out. So we've been working on this for a while. Lucas has been doing most of the work. He's been working quite a bit on the GitHub repository. And so if you see him run into him down in Brazil, tell him thanks. The architecture, fundamentals. So Delphi FireMonkey supports Android ARM64 as a target. Actually, it supports ARM32 and ARM64, but ARM32 is pretty much deprecated at this point, so we didn't bother supporting it with the Python for Delphi library. So Python for Delphi supports Android, supports Linux, and Android is Linux, so we extended it to work on Android as well. And so this allows building a Delphi app to run Python on Android. So then we're like, okay, how do we take that and make that available as a pure Python solution, a solution for Python developers that do not have Delphi installed, do not have a Delphi license, or maybe you're a Delphi developer that doesn't have a current Delphi license, right? So how do we make that available for you? We have built a Delphi application, a pre-built Delphi Android application that has Python enabled in it. And then there's a user modifiable Python script payload that runs automatically. And then you can just simply deploy, actually, we have an automated tool that modifies the Android manifest, puts in that Python script, and then resigns it so it can be deployed to Android. You could do this manually as well. There's a number of guides out there on how to resign and rebuild a APK from the parts. So essentially, we have all the pieces of the APK built with Delphi, pre-built, ready to go. There's the stub, everything that needs to talk to the Android SDK, etc., is all there. And then all you need to do is modify the Python script and bundle it up, sign it, and deploy it to Android. So still to do, we want to add live preview and bundling multiple Python scripts and modules together, customizing icons, splash screens, loading dialogues, etc., and then more testing, debugging, and your suggestions. A few people commenting here, this is crazy, awesome, so excited. And then a question about live bindings. Live bindings from the export does not currently work. Eventually could work, it just doesn't currently work. The animations work, which is based on some of the same sort of technologies, live bindings. It might be a matter of just needing to add that. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead. Yes, we're going to go ahead and do a demo. The first demo I'm going to show you is a Delphi application where you can write a Python script and execute the Python script on Android. And then I will show you the bundler that bundles up. So this is a pure Python developer solution. This bundler and the pre-built application are all or will be all available on GitHub. And all you need to do is inject your Python script, bundle it up, and deploy it to Android. So with that, let me go over and launch the demo.
This is a Note 9 running Android 10. And I have this, it's a Delphi application here that can run Python. So I fire it up, it's going to set up Python real quick, and then I can come in here and paste in some Python code that I can run. And I can modify this to say, hello world, or hello Android. Delphi. There we go. Now, not very interesting. I'll show you some more interesting stuff here in a little bit, but fundamentally, this is running Android, or this is an Android application built with Delphi, but it is running Python scripts. So you could embed a Python script in this, which I will show you an example of that in a second, that runs automatically when the application starts. But essentially, I'm running Python locally here, which is the other thing that's cool. So I can actually go in here. I can't go into airplane mode because I'm streaming or recording my stream over the network. But if I was on airplane mode, I could still run this. It's not going online. It's not hitting a remote server. It's running it locally. I can actually install additional Python modules and run those as well. So this is full Python running on Android. This is the app builder that we have to build FireMonkey apps with Android and Python, or for Android with Python. Here's your Python script. You can load this in manually or whatever. So right now we say hello Android from Python and DelphiFMX. We'll say with. There we go. Now in here, you come in here and set your environment variables. You have to point to your SDK, Android SDK, jar signer, etc. And then you can change the project application name. So we'll make this live just for something different so you can see that it's all changed. And we'll make it version 2. Why not? 2.1.3. You can change what version of Python you want. And this is the build button. So, and then this is the deploy button. So I have my Android Pixel 4 XL running the absolute latest version of Android connected. So I'm going to go ahead and hit build and deploy. So what it's doing is it's combining the parts of the Android application together and inserting that modified Python script into it, signing it, packaging it, and then we'll deploy it to my Android device. There we go, it did. So now on the device, we'll change this later, but right now it's doing the basic install of all the pieces it needs for Python. And there it is. I changed to say with Python instead of from Python and DelphiFMX. And there we go. We built a Python, we built an Android application with Python, which is pretty freaking cool. Now, this is a very simple one. all the things we showed you previously that you can use with DelphiFMX and Python you can use here, and call Python whatever you want to do. All the source code for this and the Python application, the Delphi application that is modified, is available on GitHub, as well as pre-built binaries if you don't have Delphi. So if you do have Delphi, you could modify this however you want to. If you don't have Delphi and just have Python, just download the pre-built version and run it, modify your script, and there you go. You've made a Android application with Python. Let me go ahead and change this one more time. I'll change this to from, just so you can see it's different. Now, I'm probably going to break it here, but we'll see. That's the rule, but I just think this is so cool, and Lucas is working hard on this, and I've been debugging it with him quite a bit, so I'm going to push my luck. So everything is pre-built. All it's doing is rebundling it back up. It didn't say from, so it's not uninstalling it, but I can come in here and uninstall it manually. So you notice it was PyTest Live, which is what I called it. So let me run this again. So we need to fix that. The deployment isn't uninstalling it if it already is installed. Literally just got this working. We had it working, but then of course, demo gremlins kicked in and it didn't work. But then we debugged it and got it working on multiple machines consistently, but apparently not uninstalling it. So here we go. Trying again. Okay, so now it says from, which is what we told it to say. From there. Now, actually, I want to launch this again. If we come in here, so it's quicker this time, but it does have to go through the steps of setting up Python. So that stuff we're going to change, or you can change since all the source code's there. That stuff will change to evolve that to make it more user friendly, I guess. What that looks like, maybe make a configurable splash screen or something along those lines. But anyway, very cool. Very simple. That's all you have to write in Python, and then the rest is done for you auto-magically, and just deploys right to your device. Eventually, I'd like to have like a button here that you could click so you could see your form on Windows. This is multi-device, although we haven't tested it on Linux or Mac OS, but this application could be built for other platforms. We just haven't tested it because of the way it calls ADB, the Android SDK and such. But anyway, I'd like to have a button here so you could preview your form. So as you're working on this, you can see what the form would be rendered like and how the behavior would act on your desktop, and then run it on Android as well. Anyway, very cool, and I think very powerful. I'm really excited about this, honestly. Decided to do one more interesting demo here. I took the exported form I showed earlier that I called Crazy Town Form 6 and have now embedded that into a application on Python. So this has both the Python script as well as the PyDFM file, and now I'll run it. And I've got it landscape, so it looks better also because I didn't actually think about deploying this on Android until afterward. And I'm like, oh, I could put this on Android. And sure enough, there it is on Android with the animations intact as well. That just amuses me so much. There you go. So again, this is something you could use the idea of being able to embed the styles as well as animations and whatever else you want to do. Write it in Python, design it in DelphiFMX, and have a beautiful, subjectively speaking, app on Android. All right, so I'm gonna go back. The first demo we showed, actually, I guess there's 3 demos there. I don't know if I have slide for that one. Was just showing that you can run Python locally on Android.
So you could combine this actually and make a pure Python application that doesn't use any Delphi compiler, but that has the ability for the user to write Python or modify itself at runtime dynamically. But then the second demo was of the Python form builder that lets you embed the Python script into a Android application. This is all pre-built, doesn't require Delphi. You can just go download this all from GitHub and run it, creating your Python application that runs on Android, which I think is really, really cool. It is, all the samples we're showing are single form examples, but you could do multi-form examples. The difference would be that if the you can just combine it. We'll work on making a multi-form example. We just don't have any right now, but you could totally have a multi-form example or multi-form applications as well. It's just single sample ones are simpler to demo. That's always the trick, is finding the demos that are interesting but not too complicated. All right, so now let's take a look at going farther. What can you do with this when you take and combine both Delphi and FireMonkey? So you can, or I'm sorry, Delphi and Python. For starters, you can customize the Android application. The pre-built Android application, all the source code is available there, so you can go in there and take that as a starting point, just bundle in your own Python modules, or use that as a template to create a Delphi application that has all sorts of functionality written in Delphi, but also has functionality in Python, all that runs on Android. Now, of course, because Delphi works across platforms, you could build that same application and deploy it to Windows, Mac OS, and Android and Linux, and it would work and look great on all those platforms. So you have that full functionality available to you as well. It just takes advantage of the Python for Delphi bridge to give you that functionality. So you can install that and use that to really modify everything we've shown here to your heart's content. The sky's the limit at that point. So this allows you to combine, do the parts that make sense in Delphi, the parts that make sense in Python, combine the two together, mix them up, play to the strengths of each, and then merge them together into a single cohesive solution. You can check out the tutorials and samples and videos at the Python for Delphi GitHub. I will note so PyScripter Python for Delphi is the original Python for Delphi library. There's also an Embarcadero fork, and as we're working on it, we will commit our changes to the Embarcadero fork, and they are eventually migrated back into Python for Delphi by PyScripter. The main developer, the maintainer of that, he gives a lot of review and stuff like that. So we're very actively developing this. So we'll be making changes faster than he might be accepting them. So just be aware of that if you're looking for something brand new, like some of the stuff we're showing today, may not be in the PyScripter Python for Delphi, but if you go to Embarcadero's Python for Delphi, you'll find it all there. And then if you want to address speed concerns, if you have some code that's written in Python that is not as fast as you'd like for it to be, and you want to compile it natively, you can use Delphi to compile that natively. Now, you don't have to, the main point I'm trying to get at is you don't have to use Delphi if you're a Python developer, but you can combine the two to get more out of your applications. So I'm going to go ahead and launch these other polls here. I have a poll here on target platforms. What are the platforms that you want to be able to target in your development, whether it be Delphi or Python, I suppose, either of those development tools? What sort of platforms you want to develop? And other would include the Raspberry Pi or such. So the question here, while Mac M1 is supported, is there a plan for ARM processors in general, like Raspberry Pi? There are ways to get there. The thing about Raspberry Pi is it depends on what OS you are running on Raspberry Pi. So you can run Windows 11 on Raspberry Pi. And we don't have a Windows ARM compiler, but Windows 11 will run Windows x86, 64-bit and 32-bit applications just beautifully. I've used it quite a bit. I haven't done it on Raspberry Pi, but I've seen heard people that have. That's one of the things I want to test next, is doing that. So there are ways to target Raspberry Pi with this, but like I said, it depends on what OS you're running. You can also install Android on Raspberry Pi and run an Android application there. But if you installed Linux, you could use a solution like Anbox to, bundle up an Android application onto Raspberry Pi on Linux. All right, so it looks like Windows is the main target here. That then Android is a close second, with Linux coming up as third. I'll go ahead and close the poll, and I'll share the results. How can I install Conda? I didn't demo that. Essentially, I mean, if you have Conda installed, you just create your Conda environment and then run pip to install it. If you're at all familiar with Conda, it's straightforward. If you're not, if you can just find some documentation on Conda, it'll get you started. It's really straightforward with that. So yeah, there's the results. So you're in the right spot here. Definitely, the 2 weeks ago, we talked about VCL, which works great on Windows, but FireMonkey also works great on Windows. Then I just showed you Android, and I didn't show Linux, but it should all work on Linux as well. Definitely recommend using Conda. If it doesn't work on Linux, please file a bug report. We were testing this recently, and it worked. It didn't work 100% of the time on Linux. I don't know exactly why. It may have been something I did wrong on my machine. It worked on some of my machines, but not on others. So definitely file detailed bug reports. Like I said, it's under active development, technically in beta, but it should work. All the code's there, so hey, you're welcome to jump in and help out as well, make a pull request. And the last poll is, what is your development platform? So this is the platform you're working on when you're developing your applications. Where are you most often writing your code from? Are you mostly working from Windows and targeting other platforms? Honestly, the fact that Windows 11 has the Windows subsystem for Linux and now the Windows subsystem for Android as well, that makes Windows, in my opinion, probably the best platform for developers to work from. But I'm curious to see if people are using other platforms as well. Looks like we have a few Mac and a few Linux, but mostly predominantly Windows. Is FireMonkey compatible with iPadOS? So FireMonkey itself is, but the Python embedded on iPadOS is not. And that is because Apple does not allow that. All right, so it looks like most people are developing on Windows to target whatever platforms that they are targeting. So, but everything I show, so the Delphi IDE is a Windows IDE. It runs on Windows, but it will target other platforms. Everything I showed that is pure Python, so just using the DelphiFMX Python module, will work on any platform. You can write your code on, you could technically write it all right on Android if you wanted to, but you could write it on Mac OS, you could write it on Linux, whatever, and then deploy it to any of the platforms I showed. Oops, let's hide the poll and go back to the slide. Documentation and library references. We are working on expanding the Python specific documentation, but for right now, you can access the Delphi documentation on DocWiki. There's two main DocWikis. There is the main Delphi documentation and the library reference. The library reference is what goes into details about the what properties and methods each object has, for example. Now, if you're a Python developer, you will have to do a little mental translation. For example, right now, all Delphi types are prefixed with a T. That's just a naming convention, very similar to how Python likes using the underscores and double underscores around things as a naming convention, or there's a lot of Python naming conventions if you're familiar with Python. The T is just a naming convention on Delphi, but it's removed on Python in order to make the classes more Python-esque. So while the documentation may refer to a T edit, in Python it's just an edit, right? You don't need to add the T on the front. So there's a few other minor things like that, but you take a look at the examples we have and take a look at the documentation. I'm pretty sure you're smart and you'll figure out the differences, but we are working on expanding that and creating more Python examples as well. Quick comment, I did use PyScripter in the examples. PyScripter is not required to use the DelphiFMX or Delphi VCL for Python, nor is the other true, right? You don't have to use those with PyScripter. PyScripter is just a great free open source IDE that happens to be built with Delphi and the Delphi or Python for Delphi bridge library. So recommended, open source, a lot of great features, very lightweight, great IDE. You can find more information on the link you see there. I also used UltraEdit briefly. UltraEdit's another great IDE that is part of the Idera family of developer tools. It's a works across Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, and its claim to fame is its ability to open any size file you want. So if you are looking for a good text editor, it's not technically a full IDE. It does have many developer-friendly features, but check it. It's a great. I find most developers have a extra editor that they need to edit those other files of various types, and frankly, UltraEdit is probably the best one out there for that scenario because it can open anything you throw at it. It really is fantastic, and it's not Electron based, so it's not going to suck up all your resources in the background. But that's a story for another day. So next steps. Go download DelphiFMX for Python. You can find the details on GitHub or install it via pip, but do please go out to the GitHub repository and put a star on the repository. Right now, that's the easiest way for us to see how much interest there are in these libraries and to know that we should keep working on them. There's quite a bit of investment of time and energy and effort that's gone into this. So seeing that people are using it, seeing that people are excited about it is a great way for us to justify that. File issues on the GitHub, make pull requests, whatever strikes your fancy. You can check out the part 1 on Delphi VCL at this link here, and then the replay slides and such will be available on this link here. If you are new to Delphi, or maybe you've used Delphi in the past, you can start a 30-day trial of Delphi, or you can also from there find a link to download the free Community Edition. The Community Edition is a 1-year license that has some restrictions like all Community Editions do, but you can download that and start using it as well. And of course, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and we have a separate blog that's completely focused on Python, pythongui.org, which will become the homepage for these libraries as well. So you can find blogs.embarcadero.com as well as pythongui.org will be the more definitive source for this content. And I've answered a lot of the questions as we went along, but I will do my best to finish answering questions here. We are over time. There was just a lot of great stuff to show off, so sorry about that. And I guess we got a little bit late start as well. But I will go through and answer any additional questions or try to answer additional questions if I can now. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them in the question panel. I see a lot of potential for this. Excellent work. Thanks for demoing and making this. Oh, absolutely. Great to see everybody's so excited about this. I will skip most of those though. Let's see. Delphi threads wizardry with GUI updates. Are there similar examples in Python, or is this even a new relevant question? So if you are doing the same rules apply, but I don't know how that translates to Python. Honestly, if you're, actually, I'm not sure. If you go to the Python for Delphi repository, there are some tutorials in there you can check out that do show some examples of working with threads in more details. Honestly, I'm not really sure how to answer that, but if you take a look at that other demos, then you can see those there. Have a maybe a better understanding there. Okay, so the question here is the mixing of Delphi and Python, does that work with, or how far back does that go? Is only a Delphi 11 feature? We're working with Delphi 11, so we're only guaranteeing it works with Delphi 11, but I expect it should work with probably 10 and newer, Delphi 10 and newer, Delphi Seattle. Definitely, I'm quite sure it should work with 10.4.3, for example, the latest community edition. So I would expect it should work. Try it out. If it doesn't work with 10.4.3 community edition, put a file a bug on GitHub, and that'll be a great way for us to test that. But I really suspect it should work just fine with that. Does FireMonkey or will FireMonkey support MicroPython? Not yet. There is not. MicroPython usually does not have a GUI attached to it. I mean, you could have MicroPython with a GUI, but usually MicroPython's for embedded systems. And so I don't know that it makes sense to build a GUI library for MicroPython, but it's possible. I know I've seen some Arduino type boards that you could attach displays to, but usually a lot of those displays are very limited. Or, I mean, I've seen some that you can attach regular displays to, but usually you're like displaying to like a LED array or something, you know. So Oliver's asking, why would you use VCL given that FireMonkey works on all platforms? So there are some scenarios when you might prefer VCL over FireMonkey, but most of the time, for most situations, you could probably just choose FireMonkey. So essentially, if you ever want to go cross-platform in the future, you probably want to use FireMonkey. Now, if you're trying to do something in FireMonkey and you're like, this doesn't quite get where I want it to be on Windows, I want a more Windows native behavior, I want to have access to Windows message loops and Windows handles and all those Windows centric concepts, then that's where VCL comes in. VCL is a very native Windows library. It's built around Windows controls. And so if you want to have Windows messages, Windows handles, stuff like that, use VCL. Or maybe there is a third party. Delphi has a huge, rich ecosystem of third-party component vendors with lots of fantastic components out there. Delphi VCL is more mature, and so if there is a VCL component library out there that you want to have access to, then that's an argument to use VCL. But otherwise, yeah, FireMonkey's great. There's not really any significant downside. It's just it's different, and so it comes down to giving you choices. But if you're just targeting Windows, which it looked like a lot of people primarily are targeting Windows, then VCL is a great option. But if you want to be able to target other platforms in the future, or maybe you want some of the more flexibility and some of the new behaviors that come with FireMonkey, then FireMonkey is a great solution. So I realize that's not a definitive answer. We all like definitive answers, but there's not really There is a blog post I wrote on FireMonkey versus VCL on my Delphi.org site. You can find it's probably mirrored on some other sites as well. You can go there. That breaks down a little more detail, but that's the crux of it. Oliver's asking, let's see, no, sorry, Andy's asking, open source, what is the extent you are pursuing open source? We actually have quite a bit we're doing with open source. We're trying to do more. I personally am a big fan of open source and have always advocating it. We have some internal projects that have been made open source. We've sponsored open source projects like PyScripter, Python for Delphi, these libraries here. We've completely sponsored all the development so far on these. So it is something we're investing in, not as big as, like, for example, Microsoft. We're not planning to make everything open source, but we definitely do want to embrace it where it makes sense. Honestly, I think open source is a big part of the developer culture and ecosystem, and so it's important for us to be here too. Links for the presentation right there. You can see the link there. I also put it in the chat window. I think I still have it in the chat. Yep, I will put it in the chat right now. The slides are not there yet, but they will be shortly. If you can't download them from the handouts area though. Will Bluetooth LE USB-based applications work on Python on Android? So we don't have, I don't know. In theory, eventually, yes, but it's not something we've tested. So go test it and file a report with details about what you're trying to do and how it works or doesn't work, and that will make it easier for us to support it. A lot of this right now, we're like, okay, let's try and support what we can, what makes sense. And so there's some things we just haven't thought about yet, to be honest. But in theory, all the functionality from Delphi can be exposed through this library. Now, there may be some areas that we don't want to completely expose everything to that, but a lot of it probably will be available to be exposed. So file a bug report, or not file a bug report, create a ticket, and we'll do our best to expand things. MicroPython is not based on any supported operating system by Delphi. It's mostly implemented. Yes, exactly. So in theory, I mean, there are things we could do maybe to try and target that, but it's not really something that we're most likely to target. Delphi plus Python, a great tool for AI, GL, and perhaps dev with Arduino Raspberry Pi. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I don't know MicroPython. Can't really say for sure. Okay, it looks like hopefully I got everybody's questions answered. If I didn't get your questions answered, I apologize. Do go out. It's not a personal slight. It's just maybe I thought it was beyond the scope of this, or I possibly could have missed it as well. You can go out to the GitHub and post issues for things that aren't working or feature requests and stuff like that, and we'll consider it. Again, do star the repository. The engagement we see with this is how we can justify continuing to work on this. And tell your friends. You know, I was talking to some, I can't remember what country it was in now, dang it. They were working with the schools, and the schools were like, hey, we kind of like Delphi, but we have some people that really want us to do Python as well in teaching. And, you know, there's a lot of great benefits to what you can do with Delphi. It's very rewarding because you can build those GUI applications, something you can see and deploy it across all these platforms. And they came back and like, hey, well, we have, you know, Delphi does Python too. And like, oh, it does? And like, yeah, and they showed how you can use these Delphi for Python Bridge or Python for Delphi Bridge and do stuff. And they're like, well, that answers that, because that gives us everything we wanted to have. And I really think that's what it comes down to, is we need to look at this as a way that it can expand what we can do, whether we're a Python developer that want to have great looking graphical user interfaces, or a Delphi developer that wants to have access to the some of the libraries available in Python. This gives us the ability to have both. So hope you've enjoyed this. I appreciate your time and appreciate you being part of this. Do go out and start the repositories, and we'll look forward to seeing you all online. Take care, everybody.